Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Colton, and today's video is about my initial impressions using the Pentax 645D. Now this is a medium format digital camera that I recently picked up. If you want to know why, being that this is a bit of an older camera, I did have a video where I talked about why I picked it up. And of course, maybe down the road there could be a more extensive review of this camera, but today it's all going to be about those initial impressions. And we'll start with some of the positive impressions that I've had using this camera. The first really is in ergonomics. This is not a light camera. It's definitely a very bulky camera, very heavy camera. And if it didn't have good ergonomics, that might be a huge pain, but this camera has a solid grip, a solid layout, and it makes using the camera much more enjoyable, but also allows you to shoot handheld for entire sessions and not really notice how heavy the camera actually is. So really thoughtful design in terms of the ergonomics. Another little thing that I love about this camera is that it has dual tripod mounts, kind of taking into account that it is very heavy. It has a mount for landscape and then a mount for portrait, and I think that's really cool. Now, another thing that it has that I would consider a positive impression is just an image quality. When I pull these images into Lightroom and Photoshop, I'm always blown away by just how clear they are, how crisp they are, the color science that is available with them. And, you know, I've worked with RAW files in the past where they're kind of take a lot of work to get them to where I want them to be. And these RAW files feel like they're already kind of along that path towards where I want to go with them. And so that's really exciting. A little bit less work on my end to get them to that point. And just phenomenal quality overall. The lens and the glass available for this system are excellent, and I've just been loving the images. And that's a good thing because the next couple points are things that I have not enjoyed as much about this camera. We'll start with one that hasn't impacted me too much, but I could anticipate others might find annoying, and that's in relation somewhat to autofocus. It's not a bad autofocus system. It's pretty quick and it locks on typically to exactly what I want it to lock onto, but it doesn't have a ton of focus points. It's not the quickest autofocus out there, and it can get tricked up from time to time where it will focus out to infinity and back, and you kind of have to refocus on something high contrast to get it locked back in again. That could be a bit annoying for some people. For me, I'm doing a lot of still lives in the studio where I'm doing manual focusing, and so it's not really a problem in that case. And then even when I'm shooting portraits and I am using autofocus, it happens so rarely that it just doesn't really impact me personally. But if you're someone who's wanting to use this camera to go shoot sports or a Formula One race or a live performance or some kind of action portraits, then that could be a big issue and maybe a game breaker for you. So if you're doing something like that, you need a more modern camera, most likely a full frame camera, but maybe even like a GFX or something that's been built more recently that just has a better autofocus system. But if you're doing the typical medium format stuff, maybe some light street photography, some landscapes, portraits in the studio, still lives, commercial applications, then this is going to be more than fine, and you're not probably really going to notice it too much. Now, this next thing you probably will notice a bit more, and that is also the thing that annoys me most because it impacts me the most, and that's in processing time to actually write the image that you've just taken to the card. So in shooting RAW files, if you take a single picture, you're looking at about 12 seconds from when you snap the photo to when you can actually review it in camera. And if you fill the buffer and you're shooting multiple shots, you could be looking at anywhere from 40 to 50 seconds for it to fully clear the buffer and be viewable in camera. Obviously, that could be an issue, especially for folks who need to review those images right after they take them to know whether they should move on to the next shot. Or if you're just someone who likes to see what you've taken as you're shooting, then you do have a bit of a waiting time to review those images. Now, once they're written, you can pull them up super fast, jump through them super fast, no issue there. It's just that initial processing time. One other thing worth calling out you do still have full access and control of the camera during that processing time. So you can take additional shots, you can adjust settings, change your white balance, change your ISO. You could dive into the menu system and start re-changing all of your menu items. So you still have full control of the camera. It's just if you take a picture and immediately hit that playback button, you're gonna have some delay, some sort of hourglass icon while it writes that image to the card itself. One other thing I do want to call out also is if you're using instant review with this camera, I would highly recommend disabling that, because that will black out the back screen while it writes those images, which means you have less control over the camera until that image is written and displayed. So that's a pretty simple thing to jump into the menu and just turn that off if it happens to be on your camera, and then you'll have a much smoother experience overall. A couple other things worth calling out. There is no video on this camera. It does use a CCD sensor, so no video, and that also means no live view. Tethering is a bit of an issue as well. So if those are things that you really need out of a camera, this camera does not have those. The older brother to this, the Pentax 645Z, does have some of that functionality because it's using a CMOS sensor, but this camera, not available, and can be a little bit annoying because of that. So those are my initial impressions of this camera. At the end of the day, it's a camera that has a few flaws, but ultimately the image quality is so good, in my opinion, that it's worth any heartache getting to that point. And again, I also don't want to make it sound like it's the most difficult to use camera, because it really isn't. And it's well worthwhile once you get to edit and utilize those photos. So that's the video for today. If you have any thoughts on this camera, the images I shared, or I'm no expert, but if you do have questions about this camera, I'll do my best to answer those as well in the comments below. Otherwise, if you liked the video, do give me a thumbs up. And if you want to see more content about this camera or just from myself, hit the subscribe button and that'll keep you in the know for when the next video drops. But for now, I'm Colton. I'll see you in the next one.